Before I share my story, let me ask you, what would you do if, after a lifetime of marriage, you discovered your husband's biggest secret, hidden in a safe, waiting for you to find it after he was gone? I thought I knew everything about the man I loved, but the day I found those adoption papers, I realized our story was only half written. This isn't just a story about secrets or loss. It's about the moment you decide to bring the truth into the light, even if it means changing everything for the people you love. So settle in, and if you've ever wondered what you'd do in my shoes, hit that subscribe button. Because what I revealed at my husband's funeral changed not just my family, but the way I see myself forever. The day I found adoption papers hidden in my husband's safe, I realized I'd spent my whole life loving a man who still had secrets to tell. It started with a key. Not the kind you keep on a ring, but the kind you hide in the back of a drawer, wrapped in an old handkerchief, waiting for the right moment or the right person to find it. My husband, Charles, had always been careful with his things. He kept his tools in perfect order, his books alphabetized, his desk drawers neat as a pin. But the safe in his study was different. It was the one place I never touched, the one place he never invited me to look. We'd been married for 42 years. We built a life together, raised 2 children, survived the loss of a third, weathered storms and celebrated victories, held each other through grief and joy and everything in between. I thought I knew him better than anyone. I thought there were no more surprises left. But when Charles died, suddenly, quietly in his sleep, I found myself adrift. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories. I moved through the days in a fog, sorting through his things, trying to find comfort in the familiar. I found the key by accident, tucked into the pocket of his old fishing jacket, the one he wore on our last trip to the lake. At first, I didn't know what it was for, but when I saw the safe, I knew. I waited until the house was empty, until the casseroles had been eaten, the flowers had wilted, the neighbors had stopped dropping by with condolences and stories. I sat in Charles's study, the key heavy in my hand, my heart pounding. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, there were the usual things: insurance papers, old passports, a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. But at the bottom, under a folder marked private, I found a thick envelope. I opened it, my hands shaking. Inside were adoption papers, official, stamped, signed. My name was there and Charles's, but the child's name was not one I recognized. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. I thought about our children, about David and Ruth, about the baby we'd lost, about the years we'd spent trying to build a family. I wondered who this child was, where they were, why Charles had never told me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of me. I read them over and over, searching for answers, for clues, for anything that would make sense of the secret my husband had kept for so long. I called Ruth, my daughter, needing to hear her voice. "Mom, are you all right?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "I found something, Ruth, something about your father. I don't know what to do." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I hope so." The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and memories. I moved through the motions, greeting guests, accepting condolences, trying to hold myself together. But the secret weighed on me, heavy and insistent, a question I couldn't answer. I wondered if I should tell anyone. I wondered if I should keep it to myself, let Charles's secret die with him. But every time I looked at the papers, at the name I didn't recognize, I felt a pull. A need to know, a need to understand, a need to bring the truth into the light. If you've ever wondered what secrets might be hiding in your own home, or if you want to see what happens when a wife finally uncovers the truth, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because the next part of this story will leave you breathless. The days before the funeral were a strange kind of limbo. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching Charles's things, breathing in the scent of his aftershave on his shirts, running my fingers over the spines of his books. I found myself talking to him in the quiet moments, asking what I should do, if he was angry, if he was proud, if he was sorry. I tried to keep busy. I baked bread, even though I barely ate. I watered the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary, the dirt caking under my nails. I called Ruth and David every night, checking in, making sure they were eating, sleeping, holding up. I tried to be strong for them, to be the mother they needed, even as I felt myself unraveling. The adoption papers haunted me. I kept them hidden in my nightstand, taking them out late at night, reading them by the light of the bedside lamp. The child's name, Evelyn Grace, was written in careful script, the date nearly 30 years ago. I did the math in my head, wondering where she was, if she was alive, if she knew about us. I thought about the years Charles and I had struggled to have children, the miscarriages, the endless doctor's appointments, the hope and heartbreak that had defined so much of our early marriage. I wondered if Evelyn was a child we'd tried to adopt and lost, or if she was something else, someone else. Ruth came over the day before the funeral, her arms full of groceries, her face drawn with worry. "Mom, you look exhausted," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "You need to rest." I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'll rest after tomorrow." She hugged me, her voice soft. "You don't have to do this alone." We spent the afternoon cooking, cleaning, preparing for the guests who would come to pay their respects. Ruth asked about the papers, but I told her I needed more time, that I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. That night, after Ruth went home, I sat on the porch, the papers in my lap, the ocean breeze cool against my skin. I thought about Evelyn Grace, about the life she might have had, about the secrets Charles had taken to his grave. I realized then that I couldn't keep the truth hidden, not from myself, not from my family, not from the world. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and cold. I dressed in black, pinned Charles's wedding ring to my dress, and tucked the adoption papers into my purse. I looked at myself in the mirror, searching for the woman I used to be, the woman who believed in love, in family, in the power of truth. I promised myself that today I would find her again. The church was already filling when Ruth and I arrived. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and old wood, the pews crowded with friends, neighbors, and family, some I hadn't seen in years. I moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting hugs and whispered condolences, feeling the weight of every eye on me. I wondered if anyone could see the secret I was carrying, if they could sense the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. David arrived with his wife and children, his face drawn, his eyes red. He hugged me tightly, holding on a little longer than usual. "You okay, Mom?" he whispered. I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm all right, sweetheart, we'll get through this." He squeezed my hand, his own trembling. "I miss him already." I looked at my son, at the man he'd become, and felt a surge of pride and sorrow. I wondered if he'd ever forgive me for what I was about to do. The service was beautiful, full of music and memories, stories of Charles's kindness, his laughter, his unwavering loyalty. The pastor spoke of love and loss, of the legacy we leave behind, of the hope that comes with faith. I listened, my heart aching, the adoption papers heavy in my purse. As the service ended, people lined up to offer their condolences. Some shared stories I'd never heard, about Charles fixing a neighbor's roof, about him slipping money into the collection plate for a family in need, about the way he always remembered birthdays and anniversaries. I smiled, nodded, thanked them, feeling the gap between the man I knew and the man they remembered. After the service, we gathered at the house for the reception. The rooms were filled with laughter and tears, the kitchen crowded with casseroles and cakes, the living room echoing with the sound of children playing. I moved through the crowd, refilling drinks, passing out plates, trying to keep busy. But everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Charles. The photo of us on our wedding day, the fishing rod propped in the corner, the old record player he'd insisted on keeping even after we bought a new stereo. I felt his absence like a physical ache, a hollow space in the center of my chest. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself drawn to the study. I closed the door behind me, sinking into Charles's old leather chair, the adoption papers trembling in my hands. I read them again, searching for answers, for clues, for anything that would make sense of the secret my husband had kept for so long. I thought about the name, Evelyn Grace. I tried to remember if Charles had ever mentioned her, if there had been a letter, a phone call, a photograph tucked away in a drawer. I thought about the years we'd spent trying to have children, the endless doctor's appointments, the hope and heartbreak that had defined so much of our early marriage. I wondered if Ovlun was a child we'd tried to adopt and lost, or if she was something else, someone else. I wondered if she was out there somewhere, living her life, unaware of the family she'd never known. A knock at the door startled me. Ruth peeked in, her eyes full of concern. "Mom, are you all right? People are asking for you." I nodded, folding the papers and slipping them back into my purse. I just needed a moment. She sat beside me, her hand warm on my arm. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." I looked at my daughter, at the woman she'd become, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Ruth. I found something. Something about your father. I'm not sure what to do." She squeezed my hand, her voice gentle. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. We're family." As the sun began to set, the guests started to leave. I stood on the porch, hugging friends and neighbors, thanking them for coming, for their kindness, for their memories. I watched as David loaded his children into the car, as Ruth helped clean up the kitchen, as the house slowly emptied. When the last guest had gone, I sat in the living room, the adoption papers in my lap, the house quiet around me. I thought about Charles, about the life we'd built, about the secrets we'd kept from each other and from ourselves. I realized then that I couldn't keep the truth hidden, not from myself, not from my family, not from the world. Tomorrow, at the graveside, I would reveal the name. The night before the graveside service, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the adoption papers on the nightstand beside me. I kept reaching for them, running my fingers over the embossed seal, the careful signatures, the name, Ovlun Grace, written in Charles's familiar looping hand. I wondered what he'd been thinking when he signed those papers, what he'd felt, what he'd hoped for. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the secrets we'd shared, the ones we'd kept. I thought about the nights we'd stayed up late, talking about our dreams, our fears, our plans for the future. I wondered if Charles had ever wanted to tell me, if he'd ever come close, if he'd ever looked at me and thought, "Today is the day I tell her everything." But he never did, and now it was up to me. The morning of the graveside service dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds. I dressed in black, pinning Charles's wedding ring to my dress, tucking the adoption papers into my purse. I looked at myself in the mirror, searching for the woman I used to be, the woman who believed in love, in family, in the power of truth. I promised myself that today I would find her again. At the cemetery, the wind whipped through the trees, scattering leaves across the grass. Friends and family gathered around the grave, their faces solemn, their eyes red. Ruth stood beside me, her arm around my shoulders, her presence a steady comfort. The pastor spoke of love and loss, of the legacy Charles had left behind, of the hope that comes with faith. I listened, my heart aching, the adoption papers heavy in my purse. When the service ended, people lined up to offer their condolences. Some shared stories I'd never heard, about Charles fixing a neighbor's roof, about him slipping money into the collection plate for a family in need, about the way he always remembered birthdays and anniversaries. I smiled, nodded, thanked them, feeling the gap between the man I knew and the man they remembered. As the crowd began to thin, I felt a surge of resolve. I turned to Ruth and David, my voice steady. "There's something I need to say, something your father kept hidden, something I think you both deserve to know." They looked at me, confusion and worry flickering across their faces. I reached into my purse, pulling out the adoption papers. I held them up, my hands trembling. "I found these in your father's safe. Adoption papers, for a child named Ovlun Grace." A gasp rippled through the small group of family and friends who remained. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. David stared at me, disbelief and shock written on his face. "I don't know who she is," I continued, my voice breaking. "I don't know why your father kept this a secret, but I think it's time we find out." The silence was thick, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. I looked at my children, at the family we'd built, at the life we'd shared. I thought about Charles, about the love we'd had, about the secrets we'd kept. I realized then that the only way to move forward was to bring the truth into the light. After the service, Ruth and David sat with me in the living room, the adoption papers spread out on the coffee table. We read them together, searching for clues, for answers, for anything that would help us understand. Ruth traced the name with her finger, her voice soft. "Do you think she's still out there? Do you think she knows about us?" I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I don't know, but I think we need to find out." David nodded, his jaw clenched. "We owe it to Dad and to her." That night, I sat on the porch, the papers in my lap, the ocean breeze cool against my skin. I thought about Evelyn Grace, about the life she might have had, about the family she'd never known. I realized then that the story wasn't over. Not for me, not for my children, not for the sister they'd never met. And I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to bring our family back together, even if it meant facing the hardest truths of all. The days after the funeral were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and restless nights. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, the name Evelyn Grace echoing in my mind. I'd sit at the kitchen table, the adoption papers spread out in front of me, searching for answers in the careful script, the faded stamps, the signatures that now felt like a puzzle I was meant to solve. Ruth and David were just as restless. Ruth dove into research, calling adoption agencies, searching online databases, reaching out to anyone who might have a record of Evelyn's adoption. David contacted the lawyer who'd handled Charles's estate, asking for any information, any clue, any thread we could pull. We spent hours together, poring over old letters, family photos, anything that might hold a hint of the truth. We found nothing. No mention of Evelyn, no photos, no letters, no trace of her in the life we'd shared with Charles. The silence was maddening. I wondered if Charles had ever tried to find her, if he'd ever regretted giving her up, if he'd ever wanted to tell us but couldn't find the words. One afternoon, Ruth came over with a stack of papers and a determined look in her eyes. "I found something," she said, spreading the documents out on the table. "There's a record of an Evelyn Grace Ovens, born in the same year as the adoption papers. She was adopted by a family in another state. I found a phone number for the agency that handled the adoption." My heart pounded as I dialed the number, my hands shaking. The woman who answered was kind, her voice gentle. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ovens, but I can't give out information about adoptees without their permission. But if you'd like, I can pass along your contact information." I agreed, leaving my name and number, my heart heavy with hope and fear. The waiting was agony. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt. Every time it didn't, I felt the ache of disappointment settle deeper in my bones. I tried to keep busy, cleaning the house, tending the garden, baking bread for the neighbors. But my mind was always on Evelyn, on the life she might have had, on the family she might have built, on the father she'd never known. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, the phone finally rang. I answered on the first ring, my voice trembling. "Mrs. Ovens, this is Evelyn Grace. I got your message." For a moment I couldn't speak. I listened to her voice, soft, hesitant, full of questions. I just wanted to know who you are," she said. "Why you're looking for me." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I'm your father's wife. I found your adoption papers after he passed away. I didn't know about you, but I want you to know you have a family." There was a long silence, then a soft sob. "I always wondered, I always hoped." We talked for hours, sharing stories, memories, hopes, and regrets. I told her about Charles, about Ruth and David, about the life we'd built. She told me about her adoptive family, about her childhood, about the questions she'd carried all her life. By the time we hung up, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The days after that first phone call with Evelyn were a strange mix of hope and fear. I found myself replaying our conversation over and over, memorizing the sound of her voice, the way she hesitated before saying, "Mom," the questions she asked about Charles, about Ruth and David, about the life she'd never known. I wondered what she looked like, if she had Charles's eyes or my smile, if she'd inherited his stubbornness or my love of books. Ruth and David were just as anxious. Ruth baked muffins and cleaned the house, her nervous energy filling every room. David called every night, asking if I'd heard from Evelyn again, if she'd agreed to meet, if she was angry, if she was curious, if she was willing to be part of our family. I tried to reassure them, but the truth was, I was just as scared. I worried that Evelyn would change her mind, that she'd decide she didn't want to know us, that she'd resent Charles for giving her up, that she'd resent me for not knowing about her. A week after our first call, Evelyn called again. Her voice was steadier this time, more confident. "I've been thinking," she said. "I'd like to meet. I want to know who I am. I want to know who my father was." We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our towns. Ruth and David insisted on coming, and I was grateful for their support. We arrived early, nerves jangling, hearts pounding. I recognized Evelyn the moment she walked in. She had Charles's eyes, Ruth's chin, David's smile. She was beautiful, poised, a little nervous, but determined. We hugged, awkward at first, then tutta, the years of separation melting away. We sat at a corner table, sharing coffee and stories, laughter and tears. Evelyn asked about Charles, what he was like, what he loved, what he feared. I told her everything about his kindness, his stubbornness, his love of fishing and jazz and old movies. I told her about the way he'd held me when I cried, the way he'd danced with me in the kitchen, the way he'd always made me feel safe. Ruth and David shared their own memories, childhood adventures, family vacations, the way Charles had always been there for them, even when he was tired, even when he was angry, even when he was scared. Evelyn listened, her eyes shining with tears. I always wondered if I was wanted, if I was loved. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "You were always loved, Evelyn. Even when we didn't know you, we loved you." We spent hours together, talking, laughing, crying. By the time we left the cafe, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I knew there would be challenges ahead, questions to answer, wounds to heal, relationships to build. But I also knew that we were a family, bound by love, by loss, by the courage to face the truth. That night, I sat on the porch, the stars bright above me, the ocean breeze cool against my skin. I thought about Charles, about the life we'd built, about the secrets we'd kept. I thought about Evelyn, about the family we'd found, about the future we could build together. I realized then that the story wasn't over. Not for me, not for my children, not for the daughter we'd finally found. And I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to bring our family back together, even if it meant facing the hardest truths of all. The weeks after meeting Evelyn were a whirlwind of new beginnings and old wounds. We started with small steps, phone calls, emails, photos exchanged back and forth. Ruth sent her pictures of the beach house, of family holidays, of Charles grinning with a fishing pole or holding a grandchild. David wrote long letters, telling her about his childhood, about the games they used to play, about the father he'd loved and sometimes resented. Evelyn responded with stories of her own, her adoptive parents, her childhood in a small town, the questions she'd always carried about where she came from. She sent us photos of her own family, her husband, her 2 children, their dog. I studied those pictures for hours, searching for traces of Charles, of myself, of the family we'd lost and found again. We planned another meeting, this time at the beach house. I spent days preparing, cleaning, cooking, making sure every room was filled with flowers and light. I wanted Evelyn to feel welcome, to know that she belonged, to see that there was a place for her in our family. When she arrived, her children in tow, I felt a surge of joy and fear. Would they accept us? Would we accept them? Would the old wounds heal or would they fester? The first night was awkward, polite conversation, careful questions, laughter that felt a little too loud. But as the weekend went on, something shifted. The children played together on the sand, building castles and chasing waves. Ruth and Evelyn cooked together, sharing recipes and stories. David and Evelyn's husband bonded over fishing, their laughter echoing across the water. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, we sat around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Evelyn turned to me, her eyes shining. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a family." I hugged her, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you for letting us in. Thank you for forgiving us for forgiving him." She nodded, her voice trembling. "I think I always wanted to believe I was wanted. Now I know I am." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch, the stars bright above me, the ocean breeze cool against my skin. I thought about Charles, about the life we'd built, about the secrets we'd kept. I thought about Evelyn, about the family we'd found, about the future we could build together. I realized then that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about honoring it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with hope. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready for whatever came next. Sometimes, the secrets we find after someone is gone are the ones that change us the most. I never imagined that a single envelope in my husband's safe would lead me to a daughter I never knew, or that the truth I revealed at his funeral would bring both pain and healing to our family. But life has a way of teaching us that love is bigger than blood, and that forgiveness is sometimes the bravest thing we can offer to others and to ourselves. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything, or if you've ever had to rebuild your family after loss and betrayal, I hope you know you're not alone. I know what it's like to sit in the quiet after everyone's gone, to wonder if you did enough, if you loved enough, if you mattered enough. I know what it's like to feel the ache of old wounds and the hope of new beginnings, to want to hold on and let go at the same time. But I also know that healing is possible, that family can be found in the most unexpected places, that the truth, even when it hurts, can set us free. Would you have revealed the secret or kept it hidden for the sake of peace? Have you ever had to choose between protecting the past and embracing the future? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story, because sometimes sharing our pain is the first step toward healing. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest heartbreak, you can still choose to begin again.